It was supposed to be a celebration. The air was thick with the scent of fresh roses and greed. Crystal glasses clinked, soft jazz danced beneath the murmurs of expensive laughter, and silver trays floated between people who wore their wealth like armor. Everyone was dressed like royalty, but I stood near the back wall, invisible, my dress borrowed, and my heels a size too big. "Darling, you're in the way," my mother whispered through gritted teeth as she brushed past me, her designer gown swaying like arrogance. I stepped aside, heart pounding, cheeks flushed, not because of shame, but because I knew something was coming. Something ugly. I could feel it coiling in the room's undercurrent, hidden behind the glossy smiles and champagne. This wasn't just another family gathering. It was the reading of my grandmother's will. The matriarch. The woman who raised me while my mother traveled the world chasing youth and admiration. Grandma Eleanor had passed away 2 weeks ago, and this event, this shiny, cruel event, was her farewell turned feeding frenzy. People were already circling like vultures. At exactly 3 o'clock, the noise fell into a hush. A man in a tailored navy suit stepped forward, his briefcase heavy with everyone's expectations. The lawyer. He looked up, adjusted his glasses, and cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming today. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore entrusted me with both her will and a final letter, which she insisted be read aloud in full." I swallowed. Hard. But before he could begin, my mother, glowing in emerald silk, her face too smooth for her age, raised her hand and said sweetly, "Before we start, I think it's time we clear the air." The room fell into silence again. Her smile was rehearsed, polite. "Most of you know Eleanor was very loving," she began. "But she was also sentimental. Sometimes too sentimental." She glanced toward me without meeting my eyes. And in her later years, she made choices that weren't always rational. A few people nodded. Fake sympathy rippled through the room. "I feel I should finally be honest with all of you," she said, her voice tightening slightly. "This young woman," she gestured toward me like I was a prop, "is not my biological daughter. She was adopted." My stomach dropped. She was taken in out of charity. But this, she gestured toward the front table, toward the lawyer, toward the sealed envelope. "This is about legacy. And only blood matters when it comes to legacy." The silence turned heavy. Not sharp, not loud, but suffocating. Eyes turned. Whispers fluttered like moths caught in a jar. My cousins looked at me like I'd grown horns. Someone in the back actually chuckled. She said it so gently, so matter-of-fact, that it took a moment for the dagger to sink in. "Is that true?" someone asked. "She's adopted?" another whispered. "I always wondered, she never looked like them." I stood there frozen, shame wrapping around my spine like a noose. But then I caught myself. No, I would not shrink for her. I straightened my back, met my mother's eyes, and asked, "Are you done humiliating me in front of strangers?" She flinched. Just a flicker. But it was there. And then the lawyer, bless that man, cleared his throat again. "If we may proceed," he said sharply, "Mrs. Whitmore's final letter must be read before the will is opened." I saw my mother stiffen. Her painted-on smile faltered. She wasn't expecting that. He unfolded the envelope slowly, deliberately, and began reading. "To those gathered, if you're hearing this, I'm gone. And I'm watching. I know how you all like to perform when there's money involved." Nervous laughter. A few coughs. "Let's get one thing clear. Family is not about blood. It's about truth, loyalty, sacrifice." I saw what most of you didn't. I saw who visited me without cameras. I saw who cried when I was in pain. I saw who loved without conditions. And I saw who schemed. The room had gone completely silent. Even my mother wasn't breathing. "There are truths you've buried, but not well enough. Let the will speak for itself. And may those who thought themselves clever find that sometimes secrets don't stay buried." The lawyer folded the letter again and glanced up. His voice was neutral, but there was something knowing in his eyes. "We will now proceed with the reading of the will." But all I could hear was the roar in my ears. My mother's face had gone completely pale. She opened her mouth to speak, then shut it again. And for the first time in years, I smiled. Not out of victory, not out of spite, but because something had shifted, and the storm was only just beginning. My mother didn't look at me again. Not once. She sat ramrod straight in her chair, lips pressed so tightly together they looked bloodless, while the lawyer began reading the official contents of my grandmother's will. My hands were trembling, but I kept them folded in my lap. I didn't want them to see me shake. To my grandson Peter, I leave my vineyard in Napa. Not because he earned it, but because he begged, the lawyer read. Soft laughter. Peter looked like he'd swallowed something sour. To my niece Evelyn, I leave the Monet. Use it to pay off your fourth husband.
Ouch.
To my daughter Veronica, the room tensed. That was my mother's name. I leave my silence. May it bring you peace, because I never could. The gasp that tore through the room was genuine. Someone dropped a glass. But my mother didn't react. She simply blinked twice and stared forward, like she hadn't heard a thing. Like if she stayed still enough, she could pretend this wasn't real. I stared at her. A hollow ache bloomed in my chest, not satisfaction. Not yet. Just grief. The kind that comes when you finally see the rot you'd always hoped wasn't really there. Then the lawyer cleared his throat again. He was holding the final envelope. And to my granddaughter. He paused. My name slipped from his mouth like a secret finally let out of the dark. Claire. Heads turned. My stomach flipped. The lawyer looked me dead in the eyes. To Claire, I leave the house. All of it. The property, the contents, the land it stands on. I also leave the majority share of Whitmore Holdings. The room exploded.
What?
That's impossible. She's adopted. Mother would never. My mother stood up so fast her chair screeched across the floor. This is outrageous, she snapped, voice trembling. My mother would not leave everything to a girl who isn't even blood. And that's when the lawyer, very calmly, placed a second sealed envelope on the table. She anticipated that, he said. She asked me to give this to Claire, and to read the contents aloud if anyone dared to question it. The room was silent again. Tense. Electrified. I reached forward with shaky fingers and opened the flap. Inside was a letter. Yellowed paper a little frayed. I recognized her handwriting instantly. Elegant, strong, full of life even in ink. I handed it back to the lawyer. His voice softened as he read. Dear Claire, you are mine. Whether you came from my womb or not never mattered. But the truth is you did. You were born in secret in pain during a time when I was too young to raise you. I trusted someone to keep you safe. But years later, you came back to me, not knowing who I was, and I raised you anyway. I loved you twice, once in silence and once aloud. Veronica never forgave me. She made me promise to stay quiet. Said it would destroy her if anyone found out she had a sister younger than her, a daughter I'd once hidden away. But I see now that silence doesn't protect. It wounds. You are not adopted. You are not a charity case. You are mine. And I am so proud of the woman you've become. The room was dead quiet. I couldn't breathe.
Sister.
Not adopted.
Daughter.
My eyes met my mother's and I saw it, finally. Not rage, but fear. She staggered back a step. No, she whispered. No, she's lying. She's lying. But no one echoed her this time. She looked around, wild-eyed, suddenly small in the room she used to command. Her social mask cracked, just enough for everyone to see the woman behind it. The one who'd spent years weaving lies, just to keep her place at the center. Claire, the lawyer said gently, you're the sole heir, executor, owner. Everything was transferred in the week before her passing. This home, the businesses, the shares, they're legally yours. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Not yet. I looked down at my hands, still trembling, and then up again. The crowd around us had gone ghostly pale. Some out of shock.
Some out of shame.
And some were beginning to smile at me for the first time. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I walked out before they could speak to me. before they could turn it into something polite. I walked out the door, down the marble steps, into the garden that had raised me more than most of these people ever did. I stood under the oak tree where my grandmother used to sit with me during long summers, feeding me raspberries and telling me the stars had names. And I cried. Not because I was sad, but because the truth, when it comes at last, doesn't always feel like justice. Sometimes it just feels like release. And I was finally free. The days after the will reading felt unreal. It wasn't just the calls, or the emails, or the sudden flood of attention from relatives who'd ignored me for most of my life. It was the shifts in posture, in tone, in how they said my name now.
Like it meant something.
Like I'd been rebranded.
Claire.
The girl who was adopted. Now, Claire Whitmore, heir. But I didn't feel like an heir. I felt like someone who'd been cracked open in public, spilled out in front of people who once barely remembered I existed. And now, they wanted me to lead the family company? They wanted me to attend shareholder meetings, shake hands, smile? It was too much, too fast. I stayed in the estate house, in the same room I'd grown up in, the same bed where Grandma Eleanor used to tuck me in, whispering bedtime stories that sounded like legends but always ended in hope. The silence here was loud, until the knock came.
Soft.
Almost hesitant. I opened the door expecting another cousin pretending to check in. But it was her. My mother. She stood there in flats, no makeup, just a wool coat pulled tight around her, eyes hollow. No entourage. No press-ready smile. Just her. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer. She stepped in anyway. We sat across from each other in the sunroom. The same sunroom where she once laughed with champagne in her hand while I scrubbed lipstick off napkins for the caterers. Now she was twisting her fingers like a nervous teenager. "I didn't know she'd write that," she said finally. "She didn't lie," I replied. "No, I know," she muttered. "I just didn't think she'd expose me like that." Expose. That word sat in the air, like smoke. "I spent my whole life fighting to be noticed," she continued, her voice cracking for the first time in what felt like forever. "Everything I ever had, I had to claw for. You were her secret, her second chance, her golden child." "I was a child," I said, voice sharp, not a threat. Her eyes filled. "You don't understand what it was like, knowing that she chose you. Again. After all these years. Even when she said nothing, she still gave you everything. I didn't ask for any of it. You didn't have to." The room went quiet again. The late afternoon sun poured in through the windows, warm but distant, like the world had decided to keep spinning even while everything in me tilted sideways. "I told them you were adopted," she whispered after a long pause. "Because I thought it would protect me." My chest ached. She wasn't even denying it. "I thought," she continued, "that if I made you smaller, they'd forget about you. That maybe I could have a chance to matter again." I stood slowly, crossing to the window, my hands clenched at my sides. "You matter to her," I said, "even if you didn't see it." She didn't say it. No, I turned. She showed it. In every decision she made. In the fact that she didn't take me away from you, even when you treated me like I didn't exist. She gave you space to become someone. But you wanted to erase me instead.
Tears fell then.
Not mine. Hers. Real ones. "I wasn't always like this," she said, voice hoarse. "I was young. Scared. When she told me she was keeping you, I snapped. I wasn't ready to be a mother. I begged her not to tell anyone. I didn't want the shame." "And now?" I asked. Now she looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, she didn't look like a woman made of marble and glass. She looked human.
Worn. Cracked.
"I want to know you," she whispered. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I'm tired of the pretending. I'm tired of hating someone who never did anything wrong." Silence settled again. But this time, it was softer. I didn't rush to answer. Not out of cruelty. But because I needed to sit in this moment and feel it. Because sometimes healing doesn't roar. It whispers. I finally nodded once. "I don't know what this looks like," I said. "But I'm willing to try. If you are." Her lip trembled. She nodded too. We didn't hug. Not yet. But when she left, she touched my hand, just lightly, and for once, it wasn't cold. That night, I found another letter, hidden in the bottom drawer of my grandmother's wardrobe. It had my name on it. Again. Smaller this time. Scribbled like she wrote it in a rush. Inside, she said, "Truth hurts. But hiding it hurts more. I didn't leave you everything to give you power. I left it because you already had it. Kindness, strength, patience. You're what this family needs. Don't lose that. And forgive her if you can. Not for her sake, but for yours." I folded the letter and pressed it to my chest. She knew. She always did. The next morning, I sat at the head of the boardroom table, my grandmother's seat. 12 shareholders stared at me. Some curious, some tense, a few barely hiding their irritation. My mother wasn't there. She'd texted, "I'll stay away. You need space." Fine by me. I took a breath and opened the file I'd spent all night reading. It was one of my grandmother's last moves before she passed, transferring controlling shares into a trust only I could unlock. But beneath the legal forms was something more. Buried among financial statements were emails. From my uncle, from 2 cousins, even from a board member. All trying to pressure my grandmother to declare her estate too complicated and dissolve the family holdings early. Trying to cut me out. This wasn't about tradition. It was about greed. Always had been. I looked up. "I won't be selling," I said calmly. "This company will remain intact. But I will be cleaning house." The room shifted. Eyes widened. "You can't," one cousin began. "I can. And I will. Starting with those who tried to manipulate Eleanor while she was in hospice." Silence. No one defended themselves. Because the evidence was real. I stood. "This company, my grandmother's legacy, isn't for sale. Not to you. Not to anyone. If you're here to bleed it dry, you're in the wrong room." And then I left. Outside the building, rain had just started to fall. A drizzle. Cleansing. Waiting by the car was an older woman in a beige coat. One of the housekeepers from the estate. I hadn't seen her in years. She stepped up and hugged me tightly. "Your grandmother said you'd lead with grace," she whispered. And she was right. For the first time in days, I let myself breathe. I wasn't just surviving. I was becoming. Weeks passed. The media tried to spin it as a scandal. Heiress exposes family secrets. But I didn't give interviews. I didn't need to defend the truth. It was already out. And with every day that passed, the noise faded. What remained was mine to build or break. I didn't fire everyone. Just the ones who had tried to tear it all down. The rest? I met with them. I listened. I learned. The gardeners. The cooks. The board assistants. People who'd been overlooked. My grandmother had always said, "How someone treats the quiet ones says everything." And now they looked at me not with fear, but with something else. Hope. One afternoon, I walked into the greenhouse, the one Grandma and I used to work in every spring, and found my mother there. She didn't see me at first. She was watering the orchids. Her movements were careful, gentle. I waited. She turned and gave me a small smile. She always loved these. I nodded. "She forgave me long before I forgave myself," she added. "I know," I said quietly. "I think she wanted us to find a way." She looked down, wiping her hands on a towel. "Thank you for not cutting me out. You had every right." "I didn't want revenge," I said. "Just truth. And peace." She nodded, swallowing hard. That was enough. We didn't hug. But we worked side by side, planting seeds in silence. Sometimes, healing doesn't arrive loudly. It blooms slowly. In the spaces between words. In choices not made out of spite, but strength. I stood alone in the garden later that night. The stars above blinked like secrets. My hand brushed over the top of the letter still folded in my coat pocket. "Don't lose what makes you kind." I hadn't. And now I wouldn't. This wasn't a story about inheritance anymore. It was about becoming the kind of woman my grandmother had always believed I could be, not because I was her blood, but because I was her heart. The house behind me wasn't just a mansion. It was home. And I was finally ready to live in it. On my own terms.